Hi there. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today, 25th of August, is Uruguay's Declaration of Independence. But independence from who? Well, that's complicated. Uruguay was first discovered by Spanish conquistador Juan Díaz de Solís back in 1516. The Spanish rule lasted until more or less 1814, but not without rivalry with Portugal, the rival kingdom or empire. That was because Uruguay's position is right in the middle of the then Tordesillas Treaty that the Pope set the Spanish Empire and the Portuguese Empire called the Pope to solve these differences they have. So the Pope traces the Tordesillas line more or less where Uruguay is right now. Okay. At this point, national sentiment of belonging has been growing since the Spanish reign until 1814, with José Gervasio Artigas as the main national hero. But Artigas' idea was not of an independent Uruguayan state. As of the Uruguay we know today. Artigas' idea was a confederacy with other provinces such as Entre Ríos, Corrientes, Misiones, Santa Fe, and Córdoba, which now belong to Argentina, which was then Provincias Unidas del Río de la Plata, the United Provinces of Río de la Plata. And also was included Rio Grande do Sul, that is a Brazilian state nowadays. Then they had the Farroupilha attempt to get independence from Brazil, but didn't succeed. So Artigas is very well known in these provinces until nowadays in Argentina, because he had this idea of a confederacy. But the problem is that Artigas didn't want Buenos Aires to be the capital, which is, I think, naive, at least, to believe that Buenos Aires would, allow such a confederacy to grow at their border, and they would do nothing and watch them. That's the first problem with the viability of this project. That later we will talk about, related to Uruguay. So this struggle between the Provincias Unidas, now Argentina, and the Portuguese continued, even though the Tordesillas Treaty, but in those days there was no GPS, so the line was more or less here or there, pretty much all the width of the nowadays Uruguayan territory, because of the precision of those days. So both empires kept on struggling. By 1825, the then Provincia Oriental, the territory that is now Uruguay, has been held mostly by the Portuguese. Okay? Examples are such as Colonia del Sacramento, which is a city founded by the Portuguese and taken by the Spanish, retaken. All the territory was in dispute. Okay? But in April 1825, a group departed from Buenos Aires. Those were the 33 Orientales, the 33 Orientales, 33 Easterners. Although they were not all Orientales, mostly, patriots from the Uruguay didn't exist. So they were trying to free the Provincia Oriental from the Portuguese. Okay, they landed in the Agraciada beach, which is nowadays the department of Soriano. That's the west coast of Uruguay, in the Uruguay River. Okay. They were led by Juan Antonio Lavalleja, which is another national hero in Uruguay. But their idea was not to get an independent state of Uruguay yet, only to free Uruguay, or the territory of Uruguay, from the Portuguese. So that's important, because the same year, the war has started more or less in 1825 until 1828. That's the Cisplatina War, because the Brazilians, first the Portuguese, and then after 1822, the Brazilian Empire called this territory not Oriental, as the Argentinians called it, but Cisplatina, which means across the River Plate. So we were the Cisplatina province, or state. Brazil uses states, not provinces. So the war started and lasted between more or less 1825 and 1828. Okay? Local criollos did fight. I'm not lessening any of their efforts, because they were brave and patriotic. Okay? They were heroic, and they won many battles, very important battles that name streets and very important here in Uruguay. The most important ones are Ituzaingó, Juncal, and Sarandí. So this demonstrated that the locals were determined to fight such an enemy as the Brazilian Empire. Okay? But don't get me wrong there. I do believe they were heroic, and I do appreciate their effort. Don't misinterpret me as an anti-patriotic, because these are very important historical battles here in Uruguay. Okay? And here comes the key question. But before, please, I want to ask you something. My channel is just starting. I started it many years ago, but I didn't upload much content. Right now, I intend to upload more content. So please, it's vital that you please like and subscribe this video. And if you happen to see the new YouTube hype button, please hit it. Thank you very much. Okay, so the key question here, this is what motivates this video's topic. This meme I love from Shelbyville, The Simpsons. As you will know in further videos, The Simpsons are part of my generation. I grew up with The Simpsons. I love Simpsons memes. Okay, this is Shelbyville and his cousins. You will see this in the... It's not a clickbait, no. It's an artwork. I did it by hand because Grok refused to do it. So I did it all by hand. I painted the flags. I asked Grok to. Of course, I didn't even try to ask ChatGPT because it is, more sensitive on this copyright and stuff. So I did it myself. The icon in this video. So the key question: what is it? Even though the criollos here, our national heroes, fought by these days, the heroes were La Valleja and Rivera, because Artigas have been living in Paraguay. It's called the Exodus. Some say it was they betrayed Artigas, and they had their differences, maybe agreements with the Argentine. Okay, so Artigas had left to Paraguay many years before that. So the main heroes, caudillos, back then were La Valleja and Rivera. Okay? So they fought heroically, but the main question remains the same. So how sustainable would have been a Uruguay, state of Uruguay, independent Uruguay, without what would happen afterwards? Because the war had been going for many years, the struggle between Spain and Portugal, then Provincias Unidas, or later Argentina and Brazil, kept on going. These local heroes fought bravely and they won the battles, and on August 25th, 1825, they declared independence. But it was not quite independence as Uruguay as an independent state. They said Uruguay would be free from Brazil, but it will join the Provincias Unidas, Argentina. So it was not quite independence proper. The war kept on going, and this war was called the Cisplatina War because Cisplatina is the name the Brazilians gave this territory, or the war, the Argentina-Brazil War, or just the Brazil War. Okay, so imagine this territory was at war, blockades, all that a war implies, and that was very bad for commerce. Imagine you cannot get ships to trade freely because there was a war going on, and the ruling power, the world superpower at those days, was the UK. And an idea came to their mind, an idea quite Solomonic. Of course, they were not to divide Uruguay into parts, but they had a brilliant idea that allowed this to happen. Uruguay wouldn't exist if it didn't happen. They had the idea of an independent state, independent from Brazil and from Argentina. So this is how the then ambassador, Lord Ponsonby, ambassador of the UK, asked the two powers, Argentina and Brazil, to join in a meeting in Rio de Janeiro. That was the Convención Preliminar de Paz, or Preliminary Peace Convention. That was took place in Rio de Janeiro between 11th of August and 27th of August 1828. Okay, which ended in the Treaty of Convención Preliminar de Paz, and that would be Uruguay's true Independence Day. Some people say 4th of October, but the treaty was signed 27th of August 1828. That was how long it took. So the independence process that began in 1811 with Artigas only materialized 17, is it? I'm not very good with numbers. 17 years later, in 1828, with the Convención Preliminar de Paz. And then 2 years later, in 1830, Uruguay had its first constitution. Okay, that's another main holiday here in Uruguay. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.